I want to welcome you all to this video Drasha. This week's Torah portion is a double portion, Acharei Mot and Kedoshim. I'm going to focus primarily on the second portion, Kedoshim, because I find it to be really one of the most important, and we could even say one of the most central Torah portions. It contains some of the most famous statements in the entire Bible. First of all, we have a reiteration of the Ten Commandments, although in somewhat different words. We also have the very famous statement, which I'm going to speak about later, of love your neighbor as yourself. And what is striking about this is that the book of Leviticus, and if we just look at the name of the book in English, Leviticus, it obviously has to do with the Levites and the subgroup of the Levites, the Kohanes, and the rituals that they performed in the temple in Jerusalem. The animal sacrifices, the other types of offerings, and all of the rituals that were performed in the temple. And we know that during the biblical period, the sacrificial system and all of these rituals in the temple were very much at the center of what Judaism was all about. But, there's been a debate, I think, over the centuries, but particularly in recent times, between those who see ritual as the primary focus of Judaism and those who would say, no, ritual is really secondary. You could even say most of the rituals of Judaism are optional. What really matters are the ethical and moral demands that are made. The fact is that there is support for this argument. We can find passages in the books of the prophets, in the Bible, that seem to say things like God saying through the prophet, I hate your sacrifices, I hate your Sabbaths and your new moons. What is the offering that I want? I want you to take care of the poor and the stranger, the widow and the orphan. So those types of statements seem to lend support to a view that would say that ritual is not the central aspect of Judaism, but rather are the ethical and moral dimensions of the Bible. And the fact is that this philosophy really became systematized in the early years of Reform Judaism, when it was developing in Germany after the emancipation. And there was a philosopher by the name of Hermann Cohen who had a very great influence on Reform Judaism. And what Hermann Cohen did, first of all, we should know he was probably the greatest authority in his time on the philosophy of the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. And Kant had written a book called The Religion of Reason, in which he described what would a religion that was strictly based on reason as opposed to any other kind of beliefs, what would that religion look like? Now, the fact is, Kant thought that the closest actual religion to his religion of reason was German Protestantism. But Hermann Cohen took this philosophy and adopted its basic views about ritual and ethics, but he said the fact is the closest actual religion to the religion of reason is Judaism. And Cohen wrote a book called The Religion of Reason Out of the Sources of Judaism, in which he collected all of the statements, both in the Bible and in rabbinic literature, that supported this view. By the way, we can point to what is perhaps the most famous example from rabbinic literature, and that is when the sage Hillel was approached by someone and said, explain to me Judaism while standing on one foot, which means do it quickly. Keep this brief. What did Hillel respond? He said, what is hateful to you, do not do unto others. Now he went on to say, the rest is commentary, go and learn it. But clearly, Hillel seems to say that the essence of Judaism is an ethical principle. What is hateful to you, do not do to others. So these statements, both in the Bible and in rabbinic literature, were collected by Hermann Cohen, and he presented this view, which became very central in the thought of Reform Judaism. And there actually is something that was called prophetic Judaism. Prophetic Judaism meant, again, a view of Judaism that is based on the statements in the books of the prophets, which seem to de-emphasize ritual and to emphasize justice, righteousness, how we treat other people as being the central aspects of Judaism. So the question is, how do we deal with this dilemma? And I think that we can see a very important way of dealing with this in today's Torah portion. Because as I said, this Torah portion, which is in the middle of a book primarily devoted to ritual, this Torah portion contains many statements having to do with ethics and morality. It contains the famous statement about leaving the corners of the fields for the poor. It contains the statement, don't hate your brother in your heart. It contains many rules pertaining to sexual morality. And as I've already said, it contains the very famous statement of love your neighbor as yourself, which certainly seems to be perhaps the fundamental principle, the ethics of Judaism, of how we should treat other people. But here's a very interesting thing. If you look for that statement of love your neighbor as yourself, and then you see, well, what immediately follows that are laws having to do with forbidden mixtures. You know, the Torah prohibits breeding animals of different species together, prohibits planting seeds of different species in the same field, and it prohibits famously wearing a garment that is made of different materials, that is made of wool and flax together. This is the famous law of Shatnez. So what's significant about these laws is that they are the paradigmatic examples of what is termed a chok. A chok is a law that doesn't seem to have any rational basis. There's no explanation for it. You do it simply because it's written in the Torah. Why shouldn't we wear a garment that contains wool and flax together? Doesn't make any sense. But again, what is so striking is the juxtaposition. Love your neighbor as yourself, I am the Lord, and then immediately the statement of these laws pertaining to forbidden mixtures. And I believe that what is being stressed here is the fact that for the Torah, these two things are not a dichotomy. They're not a bifurcation. They're part of one system. The fact of the matter is that the rituals of Judaism are essential because that is what has kept Judaism together. You know, let's just take an example of something that we've just recently dealt with, and that is Passover. One could say, look, really what we should do on Passover is sit around the table, have something to nosh on, while we discuss the importance of freedom. Let's consider, what does it mean to be free? What does the story of the Exodus imply in terms of our ethical obligations to other peoples who are oppressed? Let's just sit around and have a discussion and hash out these ideas and think about what they mean for us. On the other hand, what do we really do on Passover? On Passover, we sit and we eat matzah, and we eat maror, and we eat charoset, and we read the Haggadah, and we drink 4 cups of wine. Now, the fact of the matter is, certainly we should be thinking about what do these things mean? What's important about them? What lessons do we learn from these things? But I would contend that if all we had was a discussion group on the night of Passover, that would have faded out of existence generations ago, centuries ago. What has kept Passover alive and a part of Judaism and a part of the lives of Jews is precisely these rituals of eating matzah, eating maror, drinking 4 cups of wine, reading the Haggadah. Now, because we observe those rituals, it also provides us with an opportunity to think about what do they mean? What are the implications involved? But the fact of the matter is those implications, those meanings that we find in these rituals, different people may see different things. In different ages, we may find different ideas, but the rituals remain pretty much the same from generation to generation. Another good example of precisely are the dietary laws. How many books and articles have been written on the significance? What really are the dietary laws about? And how I've read so many things that try and find some unifying principle. Why are these animals prohibited and these animals permitted? What's behind not eating meat and dairy together? The fact of the matter is, I can tell you that I've never found a single, that is to say, one approach that explains all of these things. The fact is, there are many, many interesting insights. Certainly, there are many who find ideas of importance in the dietary laws, but it's very hard to put it all together and to sum it up and to say, well, this is really what the dietary laws are about. But the fact is, when we observe the dietary laws, so we preserve these practices, that then allows us to think about them and allows for books and articles to be written and to see what are the different approaches, what are the different things that we might learn from this. But if you didn't observe the laws, there'd be nothing really to talk about. And so I think that the answer really lies in the idea that for Judaism, ritual and ethics and morality are not separate things. They're part of a system. And we see it so clearly in today's Torah portion with the fact that these statements are mixed up one with the other. There's no separate, there's not a listing of ethical principles, ethical laws, and on the other hand, ritual laws. The two are put together. And again, we see the loftiest ethical teaching of the Torah, love your neighbor as yourself, put right next to the most, what we might say irrational, the most difficult to explain laws of forbidden mixtures and shotness. That's because the Torah wants to emphasize for us, it's not an either or, it's a both. It's a yes and a yes to that. And of course, if we get back to our statement of Hillel, that Hillel summed up the Torah by saying, what is you do not do unto others, the rest is commentary, go and learn it. Sometimes that second half of his statement is forgotten about. But he didn't say the rest is unimportant. He said the rest is how you achieve this. What we need to do is to learn the rest of the Torah. We need to study it. We need to observe all of the aspects of the Torah in order to achieve this great ethical principle of love your neighbor as yourself and all of the ethical demands that would stem from that. And so it's not an either or, it's a yes and a yes. And I would say that today's Torah portion is really a great illustration of that idea. Well, I want to wish everyone a good Shabbos. Certainly, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. I look forward to the day when we can be together again in the synagogue and we can speak face to face. Again, good Shabbos.